Discussing Dyslexia with Katelyn and Dawn Coker. Hi, I'm Katelyn Coker.
And I'm Dawn Coker.
And welcome back to Discussing Dyslexia. Today we're going to talk about the diagnosis and kind of what we remember about that. To make things go a little smoother, I was a little bit on the younger side when I was diagnosed. So we're going to be asking Dawn, my mother, most of the questions. And do you want to show them the binder real fast so they get what you're referencing?
Oh, okay. Well, when Katelyn was diagnosed, I started keeping just a Katelyn binder, very thick, because it has a lot of what was then more paperwork, because she was actually diagnosed in 2006. So what does that make you? 7 years old when you were diagnosed, correct?
That's older. I thought it was younger.
You were first grade, end of first grade. So, but anyway, I started keeping track of, that was how I kept track of all of the IEPs and all kinds of other stuff and make sure I had all my paperwork. So that binder has grown with Katelyn.
Okay, well, I guess we'll just jump right in.
Okay.
So, let's go way back to the very beginning. Had you ever heard of dyslexia before I was diagnosed?
I had very limited knowledge. My degree is in psychology. So my undergrad degree is psychology from Augustana College. And one summer, I was making up some credits and I took a behavioral psychology class. And in that behavioral psychology class, we touched very briefly on dyslexia and actually talked about it as it being a way the brain's formed. So I knew a little bit about that. I knew some of the signs and symptoms, but really it was just honestly a very small, maybe 15-minute, 20-minute discussion. Fascinated me though, so I kind of kept my, kind of remembered it as we moved forward into this process. So that was the only information I'd had. I'd heard little things like what everybody else had known about dyslexia. That you read things backwards and see things backwards, and I
That's a myth, though.
That is a myth, but that is I think that's why it struck me in the class that I took, because they were kind of debunking those myths, so kind of telling me a little bit different perspective about dyslexia. But other than that, I really didn't have a whole lot of knowledge of that.
So I guess you did know that did you know it was dyslexia? Did you not know? What were some of the warning signs, and what was the process of you realizing that something was wrong or something was up with me?
I think the other thing that you got to bring into the picture a little bit is not only did I have a background in psychology, but I'd worked with children from preschool age on up in my line of work. I teach and had coached gymnastics since I was very young. So I worked my way through college, and I started when I was in middle school teaching. So anyway, I had been involved with working with children in a learning environment. So I kind of had a sense of what was normal, lack of a better word, and maybe what might be a cause for concern. As far as you were concerned, obviously you had an older brother, and I'd gone through the process of, you're 4 years apart, and I'd kind of gone through the process of learning to read with him, reading books and kind of helping him learn to read. We were very active with that at night from preschool age on. And he learned basically what I would consider very normally, learning sight words and starting to make, be able to read small words in kindergarten and first grade. And he kind of learned at a very normal rate of learning. And And then I don't think I really started picking up on it until I started noticing um, some of the differences between watching you learn to read and going through that process with you, preschool, kindergarten level. I think when you got to kindergartens when I really started to be concerned, mostly because you had trouble with sight words. Tom was Matt, or Matt was Tom one time in a book when you were reading, and of course those are things that kids do naturally. I mean, I recognize that, so I wasn't exceptionally alarmed, but I noticed some other things maybe that kind of correlated to it. Speech, he had some funny ways of saying things and repeating things.
What was the most iconic one though?
Oh, it's how you said spaghetti. I don't know
Sketty.
which one. Sketty.
No, the ocean, or I would always say, "Oh, we're going to the Pacific Ocean." And that's a
Specific,
Pacific
yeah.
thing. I was like, I would always,
Specific, yeah.
I remember you
Yeah,
screaming, "It's Pacific! It's specific!"
yeah, yeah. So, you were definitely, saying words kind of differently than what they, and being very adamant, like that's how you really thought they were, what we were saying, even if you still say, what do you say, gymnastics instead of gymnastics,
Yeah.
gymnastics.
It's
So there's
it's
still stuff.
old habits die hard. Like I
I
still
know.
catch myself and
Uh,
people are like, "What'd you say?" And I'm like, "Gymnastics." Like there's no M in it at all.
Yeah, so, but I don't think you took a little longer to learn to ride a bike, and you never could figure out how to tie your shoes, and some of the things that, you
I just
do
thought I was
not,
uncoordinated.
right. Well, and that can be part of it. So, and the other thing too is like, um, asking you to do something like go upstairs and get your book or get a book. And then or you'd say two or three things like, get a book, or you get upstairs and be like, forgot to come down. What did you want me to get? It's like, what? I I just asked you to get a book or go down and get this and this. And you would come back, what did you want? So there were just some small little things when you were little that maybe kind of cued me in, but it really had to do with when you got to kindergarten and I started noticing how much you were struggling to learn to read.
Well, I think it's funny you bring that up. So we had talked just honestly a few months ago. For those that don't know, for helping me pay my bills, I'm currently a tutor right now. So I'm tutoring kids. I'm helping them get on their online classes, and I'm tutoring them, which is ironic. I know, the dyslexic trying to teach people Spanish of all things and math, and but I had a kindergartner, and we honestly won't put names out, won't put locations out, but this child was sitting there and could not for the life of him try to get sight words after I've tried everything. And then I started to remember my tutoring and started to see the light bulb click, and it was the same things. Not, it's not necessarily a short attention span, but like could not remember things in sequences, and he was falling
Mhm,
behind in class. And I had brought up to his teacher and brought up to his parents. Turns out full-blown dyslexic. Like, just I
mhm,
think the sight words was a really big thing that set me off even for him. And
mhm.
maybe
And
it's
that,
I'm hyper aware because I am dyslexic, but
well, I think the other thing too is when I first noticed, we started tutoring right away. So we were really trying hard to work on what we thought might it be just a deficit versus a diagnosis. And we were just kind of watching as you moved into first grade. Luckily, we knew the teacher really well and made her aware of what I was noticing and basically said, because at that point you're still learning to read, but first grade you really start getting into it. And I kind of said
oh,
to
I
her,
had the best first grade teacher.
you did. And I had said to her, if you notice her starting to fall behind even more, you know, you alert me and we'll see if do some testing to see if maybe something more is going on here that we aren't fully aware of. So
Right,
it was the
right.
end of first grade that you were starting to fall pretty far behind your peers when it came to reading. So at that point, we opted to have you diagnosed.
All right. So obviously falling behind was the big reason why, but what was the process like? Like, how quickly did you turn around, go get me tested? Where did you get me tested? Go ahead and just tell us about that whole process.
Um, we decided before the end of first grade, because it was actually in May that we sought help. Um, we decided I kind of thought it might be dyslexia, and we actually started looking at you were in a private school at the time, so there's a lot of differences between getting help and getting testing done in a private versus a public school, which maybe we'll talk about that at some other point. But basically, we decided to we had you publicly tested, and they said yes, there is definitely a deficit, but they really didn't have at that point, dyslexia wasn't its own diagnosis. So it was a learning disability. Well, me being the mom I am, and having the experience of dyslexia and a little bit of knowledge, I'd also done a little more research to kind of find out a little bit more about it. And so it was at that point that we actually called, the only place in the area at the time was in Easter Seals. And they actually ran a full panel of tests, and even referred you on for some auditory testing as well. And so it was at that point that we actually had you tested. It was a full day of testing, waited for the results, and then sat down with the evaluator, and she confirmed that you were dyslexic as well as dysgraphic, which is common. That's having trouble writing. And subsequent auditory processing testing revealed that you were a borderline auditory processing disorder. So that explained a lot of what
Well,
we
it's
were
funny.
seeing.
Like, I don't remember a lot about testing, but some things from testing are still locked in my mind. I remember being in a smaller room, just one other person. And it's funny now, but like, I remember not being able to concentrate at all. You would think being in a secluded room would have been perfect, but I remember hearing the clock on the wall. And I remember asking the tutor, I'm like, what's that noise? And she couldn't tell me.
Yeah, she couldn't identify the noise. Yeah. And they
And
found out
then
it was
I remember hearing that like outside noise of like people talking and things like that. And I'm like, I can't do it today. And I remember like little flip books of like different words, different sentences, and even like getting some right because they had pictures. I'd be like, oh, he's kicking a ball, or but not being able to actually read the sentences.
Well, it's funny you say that, because part of the difficulty in as a parent was you could memorize. I mean, we would read. We thought maybe you were reading because we would read you books at night, and we would hand the book to you to see if you could read it, and you basically read it.
My
Then we
favorite one was tricking my older brother. So I remember we were going through McDonald's drive-through, and you know how they have all those little signs that's like, please have your money ready now. Pull up to the second window. Well, I just remembered the signs, every single one. And he sat there and was like, she's not stupid. She can read.
I don't think we ever considered you stupid. I mean,
No,
we
but it's an
knew.
older brother thing, you know.
Right,
Gotta
right,
jab a
right,
little.
right. But yes, you would memorize the books word for word. And once in a while you'd slip up, or I kind of cheated a couple times, and I, would move point to a word and say, what is that word? And you wouldn't know the word. You couldn't stop and just know the word because you had just memorized the book. So I knew you were smart, had a good mind. So,
Right.
but
Oh,
that goes to too, some of the, that goes to the point that a lot of times, dyslexic children will have ways that they develop, to get by. And that was just one of your mechanisms that you were able to, use and get by. Served you well later on. So,
I've always been really good with memorizing stuff though. Like I remember
mhm.
doing theater and stuff, and like we would have these things where it's like, this week we're off book and you'd have to have your whole script memorized. That was never an issue for me. Reading the script, like for
Cold
auditions and
reads.
things like
Yeah.
that,
Cold reads for
I could
auditions. Yeah.
never do.
Yeah.
Never.
Yeah.
So, but
Yeah.
if I got a role, you bet I was the first person off book, like telling
Mhm.
other
Yeah.
people. All right. So so I know we talked about a couple other things. What was my official diagnosis?
Dyslexia and dysgraphia, borderline auditory processing
Okay.
disorder.
So what's dysgraphia and what's audio processing?
Dysgraphia is more where you have trouble actually writing. Your writing can be not legible because the process that the words are taking in your brain down to your hand is challenging and goes a different path. So sometimes your writing is not good. Also, like staying in lines, writing on a piece of paper with lines,
And it never
very
gets better.
hard. Huh?
Honestly, I remember on my license, they give you that little box to write
Oh
in.
yeah, trying to sign your name. Yeah,
And
yeah,
like my mind goes so fast that my hand just can't. It happens all the time. I'm like,
yeah,
I'm already on the next sentence and yeah. But
yeah.
what's audio processing?
Audio processing is just how you process spoken language, how you hear it, how it sounds to you. A lot of times, you hear the beginning, and then for dyslexic anyway, they hear the beginning sound, end sound, and kind of miss the middle. That's why you got, gymnastics, and you got, you know,
It's funny,
specific versus Pacific Ocean,
yeah, everyone's different though, but I've also realized that like it's a cool superpower because I have bad hearing. Like
Well, that was one of the things that was revealed in your diagnosis, and that goes back to the testing. Is that sound that was going on was a fan, and sometimes all dyslexics are different. I mean, it's a spectrum, and from very severe to not severe at all, and everything in between. And one of the things they identified with you is that you don't separate background noise from what's supposed to be heard, so you hear background noises at the same level as what's supposed to be. You don't filter that out.
yeah.
And we
And
learned
again,
that later on in life.
yeah, I've had to learn with it. I've had to learn to live with it too. Like again, I call it my superpower because if there's like drama going on, I can hear it. Like if you
Yeah.
think you're being slick, but I hear it. And like, but also it's a
It's
catch
strengths and
22.
advantages.
Someone can have a conversation with me right here, and I could be listening to something halfway across the room and can't process. I see your lips moving, everything. Oh, I've had so many friends sit there and be like, I'm talking to you. And I'm like, yes, but you need to grab my attention. I see you, I see your lips moving.
Right.
But I am genuinely like more interested in this conversation about who knows what over here.
Mm-hmm. Well, and I think we'll discuss later on too, it created some challenges, and it was an advantage and both a disadvantage. You have a music career as well, and it was kind of it can be an advantage and disadvantage at times. So I think, we'll talk about that a little bit later, but yeah, that was one thing that they definitely identified. The other thing was the creativity level. Even at that young of an age, they identified you as very creative, which is a definite marker. Most dyslexics have a very creative side. And the other, I think, the other thing too is high IQ. That's one thing that came out of the testing. It basically, when you're diagnosed with dyslexia, you have to have a higher than average IQ, and everything else is relatively normal except your ability to process written language. So that's kind of where you can see the discrepancies in the
And
testing.
again,
That
like I can't stress like that doesn't go away. I remember even just taking like the ACT. I hated the ACT because my math and my science were exceptional,
oh
but my
yeah, way above
reading was
normal
so low that my whole score was
comprehension.
low. So I
Yeah,
remember retaking the ACT time and time again. And oh,
just to get
I
the
got an
reading score
ACT
up.
story with you for a later date, trust me. You know exactly the story. Yep,
Mhm.
okay. But it would bring my whole score down. So I remember retaking it 2, 3 times just to get that reading score up. I remember my mom sitting there saying, "Don't take the other parts because they super score. Like just go in and spend a
Focused on that.
just focus. Don't take the other parts. Just take the reading." I was like, "Thanks." It's like you're
You
good.
made
You're
it.
good on the other ones.
You
You can
made
get
it.
some
Go ahead.
scholarships with the other scores. That
Yep.
reading, no.
Yeah. Yeah.
So what was like? So we got the diagnosis. What was your immediate next step? Like what'd you do next?
I'm a needs to know person. I researched.
You made a
I
binder.
I made a binder. I read books. I read articles. I joined the International Dyslexia Association. Um, I educated myself and brought myself up to speed on our school district and the rights, reading up on, how to navigate the school system with a child who has a disability. Um, so my first thing I did was just educate myself so I could be an advocate for you and until you could be an advocate for yourself. And then I talked to teachers. I worked with the educators. The other thing that somebody told me early on, which we were already kind of doing, is I was told the horror stories. I cried, to be honest with you. When I first got the diagnosis, I cried. Um, I knew you weren't stupid. I knew you weren't, that you could get through with this, but I knew it was going to be hard. I knew there were going to be a lot of challenges. And I prayed, I just prayed that God gave you the strength to work through it, and that, you know, I had the ability that I had the strength to help you and the tools to help you. And I worked with the teachers too. Like that, I think that was the most frustrating thing is, finding out that a lot of teachers never or thought they never worked with a dyslexic when in fact 1 in 5 children are dyslexic. So
And
they
it's
had
it's
more,
gotten better though. That I mean, you have to remember
yeah,
that was 2016 before dyslexia was a
2006.
registered disability. Like I felt like
Yeah,
the
2006.
more we grew up, the more it was like, yep, already had a kid with dyslexia. I think I was just so young when there
Right.
wasn't that much awareness and
Right. Yeah, there
even that
still
much
was
out there about it.
yeah, we caught ourselves kind of educating people as we went along. I found myself educating. I worked with the teachers. Like they would tell me, what do I need to do? How can I help her? So I found myself doing that a lot. You
And
know.
not every teacher is going to be great, and that's I even in college I had a professor too that
Hmm.
disability means nothing. They
Hmm.
wouldn't follow my accommodations.
Hmm.
Like that's just where I think
Yeah.
the
We got pretty lucky,
self advocacy came in.
Yeah. I mean, we got lucky in grade school. But as you know, learning to read is one thing. And when you got to middle school where you're reading to learn, it became a whole different set of issues. But, again, we'll talk about that at a later time when we get into some of the other discussions.
Right. Is there anything I'm missing today? Anything you think that we should touch up on?
Um, I think it's important to kind of let parents know that, there are, the sooner you can get a child diagnosed, the better. You can start some of the remediation processes. You can start use some of the tools, and get them the resources and the accommodations in the academic environment that they can use to navigate the education system. Because the reality is that dyslexia is really, while it affects certain parts of your life throughout your life, the biggest challenge is academics at all levels. There's no way around reading. And the way you process written language, I mean, you have to be able to do that to be successful. You have to do it reading it in a book? Not necessarily, and we'll talk about some of that later. There's other ways to get that information, but you have to be aware of that and use those tools. Unfortunately, most kids don't get diagnosed until they get to middle school, when they're actually reading to learn
I
versus
even had
learning.
friends diagnosed in high school. I remember one of my
Right,
best friends came to me crying, and she's like, I I've always been in the remedial class, or there's different names for it, the just the not there yet. And she's like, I just got tested. Like, the school
right,
just had funding, I just got tested. What now?
hmm
I asked her,
right,
she didn't even know basics on reading and stuff like that. She just was faking it for all these years.
right. There's just a lot of misconceptions still. I mean, some people think it's a eye issue. People think it's, your brain reads backwards. That's not it at all. It's just that whatever, written language takes a different pathway. Instead of being a function of right, it's a function of left brain, and it's it crosses a different pathway, and in that process gets messed up. You can't fix the pathway, but there are things that you can do to help increase your ability to read and increase your ability to process written language. We did a lot of that. Luckily for us, a dyslexia center opened up, and I think you're going to have one of the director of that center on and one of our Q&As coming up.
Yes.
And
And she's
yeah,
actually going to be talking hopefully about some of those myths and about the whole diagnosis process. So
mhm,
this
yeah,
this Saturday at 7 p.m.
Sunday. Isn't it Sunday?
Sunday, I apologize. Sunday the 14th, at 7 p.m. Central Time. We're gonna get on Facebook. We're gonna do just a normal Q&A, kind of like we did last week with our introduction, and we're gonna be joined by Stacy Carroll. Stacy was a tutor of mine, and she's dyslexic,
Guru.
guru, guru, really. I
She
mean,
actually
what
is the
what all
executive
has she
director
done for
of
the
the, yeah,
dyslexic community? But she's going to
yeah,
be, again, going through, these are the warning signs, these, what you should
things
do.
to
This
look
is some
for.
things you
Mhm.
can be involved with. And also, it's a chance for, if you guys have any questions, hey, I've heard this, hey, I've heard that, get in the comment box and we'll ask her. So we're really excited to have her on.
I think the biggest thing to remember when you have a child with any sort of concerns, is investigate them. I still work with kids a lot, and I run across parents who know there's something not quite right with their child, and they're afraid of the label, or they're afraid of finding out, because their child's gonna have a scar on them now, and I guess I looked at it as quite the opposite. I realized there was a problem, but I realized I can't fix the problem or deal with the problem until I know what that is. And then once I know what that problem is, then we can work on it, we can address it, and we can overcome it.
I mean,
Um,
I'm just gonna be real. Like, is it a label? Yes. Are people gonna use it as a label? Yes. But if you are in fear of that, and if you shelter your child from that, they're constantly gonna say, "This is something that hinders me. This is something that weighs me down." But if you sit there and say, yes, but it's my superpower, yes, but let me show you all the cool things I can do, like, then it unleashes all of these endless potentials of, you know, yes, but I think also, like, look at the people with medical concerns. Yes, I have diabetes. Yes, it's not, even though it's a label, like, they've never let them weigh them down from anything.
Mm-hmm.
So I always tell people it's my superpower. Like, that's what I tell all the kids.
There's definitely, there's disadvantages and advantages. And there's a heck of a lot of incredibly smart, incredibly successful people who are dyslexic. The list is long.
Have your one person to name drop. That's my biggest thing. Have one person.
What's that?
I said always have your one person to name drop.
Oh yeah, yep.
Just like, really?
Right.
Let me tell you who's dyslexic.
And I think the biggest thing that someone who has a child who has dyslexia, I think the most important thing to know is that, one, they're smart and they can learn. They just have to learn differently.
Yeah.
It's not that they can't learn, and they can learn more than a lot of people. And I think from the challenges, I think there's a lot of benefits that have come for you growing up dyslexic. You have an incredible work ethic and you're very driven and you don't give up. And those are just things that I think you learned growing up dyslexic. But I also think that we were definitely at an advantage to have you diagnosed very early on. We started remediation really early on. We were able to close the gap, never fully, but we definitely were able to close the gap. The closer you got to high school, we saw that reading level gap close significantly. But by the same token, we saw your friends diagnosed in middle school and high school where that gap was so large. Will they ever overcome it? I don't know. But so we feel blessed that we were able to get you diagnosed early. We had the resources, and we had the support of family and teachers and outside community. And one other thing I would recommend to parents is get your kids involved in something they're going to feel good about, that they enjoy outside of school. Don't make life all about school.
We're going to have a whole Q&A about that later. It's so important to turn the learning environment into a positive thing. So trust me, we're going to talk about that later, but yeah. Well, again, thank you guys for joining. As always, you can reach out on our link tree that has our email and all of our social media platforms on it. I'll put the link below. And please join us next Tuesday for our next video, which is going to be all about navigating elementary school and our side of venturing into elementary school with a new learning disability. And again, this Sunday, the 14th, is going to be a live Q&A themed, I think my child's dyslexic. What do I do now? So we're very excited to have Stacy Carroll with us there. Is there anything I'm missing?
I don't think so. I think that this was a good discussion. Please ask questions, though. We're always happy to reach back out to you and answer questions from either Katelyn's point of view or me as a parent. So we just want to help you guys navigate through this world of dyslexia.
Have a great week, guys.
Bye, guys.